All right, I'm Dave Ratt, and today I'm going to talk about compression and some misunderstandings and why compression is an important tool for recording and live sound. And there's a lot of debate, the compression wars, where there's too much compression to get more level on recordings versus using compression in the live environment for reinforcement. Now, I like to cover subjects that are not normally covered. I dive into perspectives and aspects that I can't find information on anywhere else, and I hope that is something intriguing to you. For all of you that are members of my channel, I want to thank you. I know it's not much. It's like $5 a month. It does mean a lot to me because it kind of validates that what I'm doing is important and actually worth something rather than just some free looks. That said, I understand a lot of different perspectives, and there's some countries you cannot become members, and I do make my information available publicly, most of it at least. On the member side, I do Zoom chats every 3 weeks for an hour to 2 hours and answer questions and really go into depth. There's well over 100 hours of live chats on the member side. Okay, so let's get into compression. Now, there's a train of thought of like, hey, the instrument is making a certain sound. We're going to capture it with this microphone, and we're going to process it, run it through as purely as possible, and try and recreate the sound of the original instrument through a speaker. And we're using the console and EQ to fix everything and get that sound, or alter it in a desirable way. There are some aspects to microphones and the way we mic things that alters the dynamics of the way things sound, such that what the mic picks up is not what is normally heard. Now, I talked about some of this with subwoofers and subwoofers on a separate send, and how a microphone will pick up handling noise. Like I have this recorder right here. I'm going to pick it up, and this is what I'm recording on. And in the room here, I can't hear much. There's not really a lot going on. But through the recording, that's probably significant. I haven't listened to it yet, but if any of that sound is coming up through mic stands or coming through vibrations of any type, the microphone is distorting the audio picked up and adding stuff that we don't hear, at least in the perspective that we would hear it normally. That noise is audible. I can hear my fingers touching it, but not at the level of my voice. I mean, it's much quieter. Yet the mic in the recorder has made it much louder. This is a very, very important non-linearity. When you mic something close, you are altering the natural dynamics that are being created. You're capturing them in a distorted way. One example of that I will do in a bit, where I use my stove to use the click, click, click sound, and I hold the recorder up, and I move the recorder side to side a few inches, and closer to one mic and farther from the other. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'll bet we hear a distinct volume change that's fairly drastic between the two mics, swinging from left to right. We hear tremendous changes as the distance between the sound and microphone is altered. Now, I use the pulse of the spark on the oven because it's a very nice point source, and I put some padding around it. We'll do that in a bit. Another example is in the video I did on impedance, where I set up for the real speaker sound, the speaker multi-channel speaker, I set up 2 mics. And when I move my head to one side or the other, it raises the volume in this mic and cuts it in this mic, and vice versa, in a way that is unnatural if you were sitting in the room. For me to do this or this does not change my volume very much if I'm talking to you in real life. But if I do this to this, you probably hear a much more drastic change because I'm very close to the recorder. So this close to sound is capturing these differences. And if your head was very, very close to me, you would hear it move that way. So it's actually capturing something that is somewhat correct. But then when we amplify it, and we've taken these two mics and panned them stereo, or we've taken a single mic and run it through a sound system, those differences of volume are now magnified in ways that are unnatural. If you have a speaker, a bass speaker that is moving with the low frequency sound and a mic that's very close to it, well, when it gets closer, hey, Mr. Bones, when it gets closer to the mic, it gets louder because it's closer. It's moved maybe, let's say it's that far away and it moves this much. It's moving 25 plus or minus 25% of the difference, of the distance. That might add several dB. But if we're 10 feet away, it's only moving 1.1% of the distance. So the volume, the distance-related volume increases are non-existent. When a cymbal is mic'd by a microphone that's close, it gets closer and farther, you'll hear it increase and decrease in volume. But farther away, those changes in volume are not the same. Same thing with a singer moving the mic close and far to their lips. We get drastic volume changes. And these occur throughout the various miking techniques that are used and on various instruments. Horn players getting closer or farther to the mic. And it's not just the distance of the mic and the distance of the speaker. We might have the volume level itself. If a guitar pedal gets stepped on and it increases the output of the amp 6 dB, let's say, and this mic is very close to it, that mic will see the full 6 dB increase. If the mic is farther away, it's picking up the mic plus the room and all the reflections. It will raise the overall volume, but not that pure 6 dB change that we got up close. It's diluted to some degree. So this seems like a good argument for miking things farther away, so that the distance differentials and volume changes are more consistent with what we would naturally hear, and they're not being overly pronounced. But there's a conundrum here. When we mic farther away, we are now capturing more of the room and less of the instrument, or the ratio of the instrument to the room has changed. So we've picked up a more reverberant sound. Then when we take that sound, that combination of the room and the mic, and re-amplify it back into the room, we've kind of created an issue. We've created an amplification of the room within the room. And that's an unnatural event as well, and highly undesirable unless your room is extremely dead. So what do? We have volume issue differentials when we mic close, and we have room sound when we mic far away. We can't get rid of the room sound. We can noise gate things that are pulses like snare drum and try and delete some of the room sound. But even when the mic opens up, it's farther away and it's picking up room sound with the mic. So we're kind of hiding it, but it's still there. That is very, very difficult to extract that room sound out of the signal. Conversely, we mic close and we accept those volume differentials as well as the proximity effect, which is that low-end boost that we get when we use directional mics miking very close. And that has to do with the design of mics. I talk about that in some of the mic rebuild videos as well. But we can deal with these volume differentials. We can mitigate those, and they're easier to mitigate than to extract that excessive room sound. And we can mitigate the excessive low end, the proximity effect of miking close, by using EQ. And the way we mitigate those volume differentials is through compression. What we'll do is mic close, minimize the amount of room sound, and you have your volume differentials. Let's say we're using a cymbal, miking a cymbal, and it's moving closer and farther. So you get a shh, Oh, you don't like that sound. By putting a compressor on it that looks at the loudest volume and brings it down a bit, and the volumes that are a little quieter, it doesn't affect them. It will smooth those volume differentials out and give you a more consistent sound. It does bring up the room sound and background noise a bit, but because you're turning it up a little bit to get the low volume higher. But by miking close, you've already reduced that background sound significantly if you've mic'd close enough. The same thing goes with a singer that sings close and far away. Use compression to reduce the volume differentials from the up close and far away sound. And this applies to just about everything. Having some compression properly applied such that you can make the sound more consistent can effectively mitigate a lot of those volume differentials that occur. Some sound systems are very dynamic, and they maintain a lot of those peaks. And we see that with horn-loaded systems that are have very high transient responses. This may or may not be a desirable trait. If you have recorded music where the processing and recording of the music has mitigated or reduced some of those peaks, and it's been dealt with by the recording record producer or engineer, whoever's dealt with the tracks as it's come through, now you have something that's been mellowed out, that's compatible with home hi-fi and a wide variety of systems. If you want to make that sound more live and rejuvenate, or at least not lose what has been reduced, having a highly transient system can be extremely useful. And we see that with like Danley and Function One stuff, and it's got this incredible punch and dynamics to it. Conversely, with live music where we have accentuated peaks, we've mic'd something very close and we're getting transients that are even louder than what we would experience if we were in the same room with the instrument. Micing a snare drum an inch away has an incredible transient, more transient than maybe being in the room or a club with that snare drum 10 or 15 feet from you. So capturing all that transient and using a highly transient system just means you need to use a bit more compression if you want to get a more realistic sound that is not overly dynamic. With systems that are less dynamic, reflex systems, speakers that have less horn or no horn, some of that compression is done in the design of the enclosure. It naturally reduces some of those dynamics and makes our compression strategy less complex. It comes out, I call it more, it's more forgiving. Some systems are more forgiving to mix on, and others need to really have a lot of attention paid to the various dynamics in order for certain instruments not to jump out really loud and other ones to be too quiet and then they jump out, or a bass player that plays inconsistently. There's another example with a bass DI versus a bass mic. With a bass mic on a speaker, a bass player might go dung 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 dung, and they have varying volumes in the various notes that they're playing. And driving the amp hard and having a speaker in the bass rig that kind of squishes down or naturally dynamically compresses, mechanically compresses the louder ones, gives you a pretty consistent or a more consistent sound. When you put a bass DI on that, it doesn't have that softening of the speaker amp combination to reduce it and bring it to a more consistent volume level. So with a bass DI, you're going to need to use more compression than you would need to use on a bass mic. That's not to say we should only use bass mics. Bass DIs sound beautiful, but it does highlight humanly caused issues with the bass playing more so than the bass rig would. So squishing that down with a compressor can soften that. Digital is very good at maintaining all of those dynamics. What goes in is mathematically calculated and transferred in numbers and stays intact throughout. Digital consoles are renowned for sounding harsh or sounding clinical. Oh, also, digital consoles have a lot less crosstalk. Analog consoles kind of bleed from channel to channel, and they kind of soften. That gives you multiple versions of the same signal bleeding through. It gives you a softening of the various inputs. A digital console tends not to do that, so you get this extremely clinical output. This is why we see the desire for like tube compressors on the output of digital consoles, or using transformers, or finding ways to make digital consoles sound more natural and less clinical. Again, it's related to the maintaining or over amplification of transients, that happens in the process of miking and where those mics are placed, and then the way that we jump through various hoops to try and soften that and bring it to a more desirable sound. All right, I'll go ahead and do this video with the stove clicks, and we'll give that a check. Okay, so I've got this slowed down to 2% speed right now, and we can see the spark that's happening and hear the actual spark and the reverb of the sound bouncing around the stove there. I put some cotton insulation to reduce it a bit, and but we can still hear it clearly, that. And I'm going to move this from side to side, and I will play this at various speeds, and you'll hear it go. If you have a stereo headphones on, you'll hear it go from one ear to the other. But most importantly, look at the meters that I'm showing here, and you can see that the volume level is not changing that much, and this is the actual metering of the signal that you're hearing. Yet the sound of the reverberation versus the direct attack changes. That balance changes as I pull the recorder farther away from the sound source here. And it's to kind of give you an idea of the alteration of dynamics and the way that sounds are captured. So give a listen, and it's kind of fun. Also, this is recorded at 24-bit 96K. So what's cool to notice is, even though I'm moving this thing only about 4 or 5 inches away, you can hear the difference in the reverberation versus the direct signal. The direct signal goes from like a real sharp, distinct pop to having more of a click. It loses some low end due to the proximity effect, and we pick up that kind of longer trail. And this is miking something relatively close. Now for me, who's standing there at a distance, the sound never changed. It sounded the same regardless of whether this was close or not. So the proximity of the microphone to the source has a dramatic effect on the balance between reverberation and direct signal, the impact of the direct signal, and the sensitivity to slight amounts of motion. All of these things are factors where microphones distort the audio in unnatural ways. And compression is one way of dealing with it. And also, it's just kind of fun to do this test. I've been looking for a reason to use this Spark, which is a very, very cool sharp transient. So that's pretty interesting. Deathbiter does not like the stove clicks, but they are very interesting to hear. Cool. I hope you enjoyed this, and check out my other videos on various topics, and more to come soon.